Hello everyone. Welcome to my Tuesday night stream series. How is everybody doing here this fine Tuesday evening? I am Jason Bowman. I'm the creator of Eventide and the Pathfinder setting, and tonight what I'd like to do is chat with all of you a little bit about something that's kind of baked into part 2 of Wolfren's fate, but really is kind of also speaks to the larger narrative being set in kind of this starter region, right? You know, the design of Eventide is focused on kind of the town of Wyrmbone and the Iskar Valley and the north and the continent of Alnir. And each time you kind of get in a bigger ring, we're talking about a lighter level of detail. The Wyrmbone is very detailed. The Iskar Valley is relatively detailed. The north is a little lighter. The continent is really kind of sketchy once you get down to the lower parts, and then the other continents are just kind of thoughts and ideas. Because honestly, this is kind of the best way for me to build a campaign, is to build it with something that I can play with and develop as I go. So to that end, one thing that is pretty important is the kind of economy and politics of the region, how that all plays together, and how it manifests in these first stories. Because I do think a good, vibrant fantasy setting needs a sense of place. And that sense of place is more than just the people, you know, and the background set dressings as the adventurers run around and collect treasure and fight monsters. For them to feel real, they need families and jobs and faith and a routine and all of these things that kind of play together to make it feel like a more vibrant tapestry, that it's a complete place and not just a you know, kind of trying to think of it, like a Wild West fake set where all of the buildings are just two-dimensional, right? There's nothing inside them, they are just fake. Like a film set. So part of that is making sure that the economy and the politics of the world make sense and have kind of a good cohesive story there that, you know, even if it isn't really the player's job to meddle with this, even if it's a thing that they ultimately decide, you know, yeah, I'm not getting involved with the local politics, these politics will still influence the game, it'll still influence the story, it'll still kind of be present, even if they're not playing with it, right? I do think that a world feels a lot more real if there's just too much for the players to do and interact with. So, by default, there are parts of the world that they just don't touch. So, yeah, let's talk a bit about the North, what its kind of whole deal is, and how that narrows into Wyrmbone. That's what we're going to talk about here tonight. Because I think, you know, as my players are digging deeper and deeper into part 2 of Wolfren's fate, they're starting to get a sense of it, right? They're starting to understand what makes this place tick. And although they don't know even half of what I'm about to discuss tonight, not even a quarter. They barely even scratch the surface. There is kind of this deeper storyline that's playing out before them that they are, as of yet, kind of unaware. When they do finally become aware of it, they'll realize all the texture that was laid down before them. So, the North. So you got Zankar. Zankar eats up the middle of Alnir, right? And it goes from coast to coast. So, you know, Zankar really is a continental power. But it doesn't stretch all the way to the south, and it doesn't stretch all the way to the north. It kind of sits in the middle. And honestly, this is where the best farmland is, where the biggest forests are. So, you know, it kind of controls the continent's breadbasket to a certain extent. But the north is a resilient place. That kind of lives by its own rules. The winters there are much longer than they are in the southern parts of Alnir. It gets consequently a lot colder. It gets a lot snowier. It's a much harder place for Zankar to conquer because it's so unlike everything else they have. They can't just send their armies up there to take it over because, frankly, the weather fights them half the year. So as a result, it kind of has its own system, its own economy that plays out, and it really plays out along the Ruby Road. Now, the Ruby Road stretches from one side of the continent to the other, running through 3 major cities. In the west, it's Varnathus, the gigantic port city, and one of the largest cities on Alnir. A center of learning, a free city that resists Zankaran rule, that is located atop a bunch of steam vents and hot water geysers, allowing its port to stay mostly thawed even in the depths of winter. And as a result, the town itself is also heated. And as a result, it is a very, very popular place. It's also the most kind of steampunky location in all of Eventide. Varnathus is kind of a different kind of place. It's a city that has a lot of pipes. And as a result, has some things that are steam-powered and clockwork and stuff like that. But you got Varnathus in the far east. Or sorry, Varnathus is in the far west. I had that backwards. Varnathus is in the far west. In the far east is Tusktown. Now, Tusktown is very, very different than Varnathus. Tusktown is a place that gets iced over in winter. And it is kind of a frontier survival kind of place where when winter comes, they batten down for it. But it's also a place where, a lot of people go to hunt very large, predators and whatnot out on the ice floes up there. It is a source of fur and ivories and other sorts of exotic animal byproducts, blubber and fat and oils and things like that. But Tusktown is a real kind of Wild West kind of place, but in that it is in the east and really far north. So it is a place of kind of rugged outdoorsmen and wildlife hunters and brave explorers hoping to go north, even further north. And between these two, you have Wyrmbone. Wyrmbone sits kind of almost exactly in the middle. Between Tusktown and Varnathus, there is a road that travels the entire distance, going from one coast to the other, and Wyrmbone sits in the middle. And Wyrmbone is the vital kind of linchpin to the North's economy. Because whereas Tusktown and Varnathus are port towns, they are trading towns, most of the wealth that is generated in the North is not made in Tusktown or Varnathus. It's made in Wyrmbone in the Icescar Valley, and it flows out to those places. Now, that's not to say that each doesn't have its own thing. Varnathus is a place of learning. It has technology. It has inventors and things of that nature. That's going on in Varnathus. Tusktown, obviously, as we said, has a lot of products, animal products, and hunting trophies, and explorers and stuff like that. So they both have their own areas of expertise. But the Icescar Valley serves as kind of the North's breadbasket. A lot of the largest farms are in the Icescar Valley. And it also serves as a place of massive stores of raw materials. From, rare and valuable woods to ore, and of course, priceless gemstones that come from the gemwood itself. And frankly, in some of the Blue Claw Mountains as well. So, a lot of these materials, all throughout the Icescar Valley, find their way to Wyrmbone, where craftsmen in, the Jumbles and in the Black Arches district take a lot of these materials and process them into either refined materials or go ahead and turn them into finished products, right? So there's a lot of jewelry making that happens in Wyrmbone. There's a lot of woodworking and wood carving that happens in Wyrmbone. All of the logs that come floating down the river that come into Wyrmbone are processed out in the field, cut into logs, cut into timber. That massive timber flows to Varnathus and less to Tusktown. Most of the timber goes to Varnathus, because taking timber through the mountain passes to the east is a bit too treacherous. They'll take rare things and stuff like that, but they generally don't take lumber that way. But things like ore and jewelry and gems do flow in both directions. So at its heart, this entire region, from food to lumber to ore to gold to gems to precious minerals, all of that is found in the Icescar Valley. Almost all of it flows through the major cities there, and of them, Wyrmbone is by far the largest. And from there, merchants take it to the coast to be shipped to other ports, to be shipped to other places, and to go to trade markets all around the world. So, unsurprisingly, it is this wealth that is both the greatest benefit to the North and its greatest danger. Greatest benefit because it is that money that allows them to keep Zankar at bay, right? They do have enough money to grease enough pockets, to hire enough mercenaries, to put together small armies and expeditionary forces to make sure Zankar stays away, because Zankar would love to annex this entire region and add all of its wealth to the Imperium. But with the weather, the distance, and the resiliency of the folk up here, they just haven't been able to make it happen. And frankly, a lot of that is powered by all of the money that flows out from the Icescar Valley out to the coast. So there's that. But it is also its greatest danger because the fractious infighting and machinations to control this money and this power that comes from it, and the power from these natural resources, is the thing that could fracture the North and cause it to fall prey to Zankar, right? Their own infighting could make them weak. So, that's the kind of base setup. That's the basic structure of the North. Now, getting deeper in from that, the thing you got going on, the major power base in the North, is the organization called the Nine Spokes. We've talked about them before in the kind of, we had a chat about organizations. So this is where the Nine Spokes really comes in. They're a cabal of nobles, powerful nobles and merchants who control the vast majority of the trade in the North. And there are major houses, major noble houses and merchant houses that control the Nine Spokes in all three of the major cities. Each one has its own representatives that make up part of the power structure of the Nine Spokes. And it originally started as 9 families. It's not quite that anymore, but that's why it was called the Nine Spokes, because each one of the cities had 3 major families who banded together to work together to kind of lock down and control trade in the North. So, these groups are not publicly aligned. It's not like there's a symbol for the Nine Spokes. I mean, there is, but no one wears it. The affiliation is secret. And they do this very intentionally because it allows them to keep up appearances that they are competing and fighting amongst each other. And funny enough, whenever there's a big trade dispute, and it involves a couple families from the Nine Spokes and some couple other families, the ones who always seem to lose are the ones who aren't in the Nine Spokes. And it was fractious, and there were losses on all sides, but in reality, the Nine Spokes always comes out ahead. So their struggles are really just for show. They will have entire things where there are grumbling trade wars, where they will make it clear that, members of this house are squeezing this trade route and buying up the caravans that are going from here to there, making it so it's harder for us to get our goods. And really what's happening is they're just manipulating the market and the market prices on things by manipulating trade. Oh yeah, all of the merchant wagons going to the east have been bought up by this one family, this one, lumber consortium. So we can't get your shipment of jewels there. But I mean, I guess we could hire a private courier to do it for cheap, to do it, but it's going to cost extra. And this is just a way that they squeeze their opponents while maintaining a kind of easy and free flow of trade for them. So the Nine Spokes aren't evil per se. That's not kind of their thing. They're more like capitalists, right? They're here to make a buck, and they don't really care who gets hurt in the process. They're definitely not good, but they are just frankly greedy, right? They're just here for power and money. But they're not alone. So, you can only run that kind of a large organization for so long before there are going to be people who figure out it exists. Ugh. And in this case, that's where the Upstart League comes in. So the Upstart League is a handful of families who have realized that the system is rigged and are working together to kind of form a secondary competing power structure. I wouldn't go so far as to say that the Upstart League is trying to form some egalitarian paradise. That's not it. They're just mad that they're cut out. And as kind of lower class, merchants and families, they are working to build their own power structure. This won't necessarily benefit anyone, except for the fact that when these two larger organizations are competing, that does make things more fair for everyone. But in the end, if they win, they're just going to replace one problem with the other. But the Upstart League is currently only 3 families based primarily in Wyrmbone. And one of them, the Grime Nail, is a family of goblins. And they are growing more and more kind of weary of the slow progress and pace of working to undermine the Nine Spokes' control over markets, and are looking to do things that are perhaps more dangerous, even bordering on, acts of sabotage and vandalism to kind of move the needle. Whether or not this actually starts or ever becomes a focus of an adventure, I'm not sure yet. But that's the setup we have. So, power-wise, you've kind of got 2 large power groups. Now, there is another kind of economic power, especially in Wyrmbone, and that is the underground. There is kind of an underground criminal element that is moving illicit goods, and in some cases stolen and pilfered goods to the coasts. So there is kind of a sub-network that trades in poisons and illegal magics and all sorts of strange stuff. They are less of a... I'm really tired today. They are less of a major power structure in the north, but they are nonetheless there. Wolfren's Fate actually features... the second part features the player's first brush-in with this, when a group of... a pair of kind of ruffians get hired to beat them up, and they are carrying with them kind of like a job card from this organization, this kind of illegal underground organization from which the Gaunts have hired some folks to attack them. So there is that as well, but they are not as big of an influencer in the major trade markets because most of their stuff just is kind of smuggled along with everything. Now there's this fourth kind of power group in all of this, and that is the actual workers and merchants. And we'll get to them here in a second. So locally, if we're looking locally at the power structure, you do have the Nine Spokes are in town. You do have the Upstart League in town. You've got these criminals, and you've got the guilds. And the guilds are there to kind of represent actually the workers and the people of Wyrmbone. I don't necessarily think they do a great job of covering everyone, but they do cover their guild members, which is a lot of the skilled labor in town. The unskilled labor in town is mostly unrepresented and is frankly pretty fed up with the whole system. But, without some sort of major revolution or shakeup and things, they're not a organized power structure. So, you've got the Nine Spokes. And they have pivotal key control in Wyrmbone because one of their leaders is on the council. So, the head of House Trevere, Rattlein Trevere, the Trevere house is in the Nine Spokes and is part of this kind of secretive controlling group. running trade. And Radalin is, one of the most powerful members in the Nine Spokes. He controls vast amounts of wealth. He controls a number of the major logging consortiums in town, and is therefore also controlling a lot of the gem flow, and is just an incredibly powerful and very wealthy individual. He's also very charismatic and uses his power on the council to play up the local politics and the local council as helpful and helping of people, right? He himself personally spends a great deal of his family's money feeding the poor and making sure they have warm places to stay in winter. But all of this is a pittance compared to the actual wealth he is pulling in by controlling the vast majority of trade through Wyrmbone. And not directly, but through intermediaries and the other families. Now, on the council is, as I've said, 3 seats on the council. And Radalin controls the noble seat. And will continue to do so for several years. The holy seat is controlled by Father Yag, who is a priest of Astramari who's very old. And frankly, sides with Radalin all the time, because Radalin gives money to the Church of Astramari, specifically his Church of Astramari, on the regular. So Father Yag, who is kind of doddering and out of it most of the time, falls asleep at council meetings, mostly just votes with Radalin. That leaves the final member in an awkward spot, and that's Delamira Alvain. And Delamira Alvain is a member of the Carvers Guild, and she is perpetually frustrated with the council and its proceedings because she can't get any progress on fighting for rights, or fighting for better pay and better working situations for the crafters and the folks in the guilds in town. But she is solidly with the kind of guilds and stuff. The upstarts do not have any control or sway on the council at all, although they generally kind of see Alvain as they're in. They know that they view her as kind of as an enemy of the Spokes, even though she doesn't know it. She is in that way helpful and useful to them as well. But Alvain is loyal to the guilds and the workers, and is frankly, as a character, she's the one that actually has noble intent here, and isn't really interested in trading with secretive power groups trying to power broker. She just wants to do what's right by the people and the workers of Wyrmbone. So that's kind of your basic setup. So, at its heart, the wealth in this region is all generated by farmers and loggers and miners who bring goods, bring raw materials to Wyrmbone. Those raw materials are refined, turned into finished goods or finished raw materials, right? Turning raw iron into iron bars. And then those things then find their way to the ports and to cities beyond. And every step of the way, there's somebody in there getting some coin. Every time that stuff is transferred, someone is making a profit off this. And generally speaking, it's one of these larger power groups. So the Nine Spokes are getting fantastically rich, controlling this trade. And the Upstart League is trying to horn in on their business. The guilds are trying to fight for better pay, better compensation for the people in the middle. And then you've got the criminal organizations who are trying to skim whatever they can off of a situation filled with money, wealth, and power. How does that all play together? Well, for the PCs anyway, it leaves them in kind of a curious spot because they are coming into this situation as adventurers. And adventurers don't fit into this structure well. And that's by design. Because I think adventurers are best kept as wild cards that all the groups kind of want to court, because adventurers are useful when they're controlled and when they're not being used against you, right? So the Nine Spokes, immediately start making overtures to the characters, right? There is an entire scene where the players visit House Trevere, and Radalin is buttering them up and challenges them to an archery contest that he intentionally loses. And the players can figure it out. But basically what he's trying to do is just get the PCs to think of him as a friend. Why? Having adventurers on your side is good. It's the best thing about it is they're not on your side, which is what you don't want. You don't want them breaking into your place at midnight to steal your stuff and murder you. You do want to be able to use them to go investigate your enemies or find things that you want found, or specifically not find things you don't want found. So Radalin attempts to butter them up right away. These other groups, frankly, don't even know that they exist yet. The crafter or the guilds don't really have any real in on the PCs just yet. The Upstart League hasn't really identified them, but will once they make their allegiances known as either being in Radalin's pocket or not. And the criminal organization certainly starts learning about them because contracts start getting put out on them. So the life of an adventurer is kind of a middle ground where you get tastes of all these things, but it doesn't become your prime concern, at least not at first. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is just laying foundation. It's about putting down track so that as this story progresses, it all makes sense, right? You know, that they look back and go, oh, this isn't a thing that suddenly happened, you know, all in 1 minute. They kind of go, oh, yeah, no, we've been working with this Radalin guy for some time, and we've always had kind of bad feelings about him. But now, as it turns out, he's, you know, cutting out small businesses, you know, and engaging in illegal practices to ensure that his logging concerns are really the only ones in town. And he's doing that by, frankly, some pretty shady stuff, right? You know, getting to the point where he might even be leading folks into danger and ruin so that he can come out ahead. You know, I can see it going that route. That's not really the concern in Wolfren's Fate. I think Wolfren's Fate is a tighter story that's telling kind of the tale of what happened to Wolfren and how he gets out. But its focus as a introductory adventure means that it has to do this kind of vital work of setting up the economy. So ultimately, the players haven't gotten a complete picture of that yet. They will get more and more of a picture of it through the rest of part 2 and into part 3, because part 3 ties in, you know, Red Thistle and the Gemwood, and starting to realize that this entire place is a kind of large economic region, and there is this kind of greater power going on there, and they already know some of the major players. Like, I'm just kind of slowly building this as a puzzle, right? They're not getting all the pieces yet, but they're getting enough that they can start realizing that there is indeed a picture there, and that all these things do go together. They just don't necessarily know everything. And at its heart, you know, when it's all said and done, the setup here is one that economics and politics can become the adventure, right? Because it's a powder keg, right? The situation is ultimately untenable. You have one group that is in control, and they are funneling more and more and more money and power into the hands of very few. Meanwhile, you've got other people who are losing patience with trying to do things the slow and steady way and may turn to more desperate action. Then you've got the kind of mass of people who actually are the ones being exploited, much of which who are kind of asleep to what is going on. But if they get awoken, if these injustices become apparent to them, if it becomes suddenly real that, you know, hey, you know, we mined this ore, we turned it into ingots, we sent those ingots to Varnathus, and when it was all said and done, we made 5% of the gold that was made off of all this work and effort, and the vast majority of the rest of it went to merchants and traders and the wealthy, that's going to make a mess of things, right? And if that economic engine breaks because the rich and the powerful got too greedy, they didn't make sure that the those in charge didn't bother to make sure that the structure was equitable, then you can have a situation where strikes happen and trade is disrupted and the money stops flowing. And if that happens, then you end up with a problem that Zankar may try and exploit. Now, of course, the next level kind of mischief on that is that Zankar may learn this and actively move to support local, unrest, right? Because doing so destabilizes the region and gives them an open, right? And the thing is, they don't even need all of the north at first. Zankar just needs Wyrmbone. If Zankar gets Wyrmbone, the whole thing collapses, because Tusktown and Varnathis rely on trade going back and forth to be sustainable. They rely on the food, the timber, the ore, the gems that come out of Wyrmbone to make them profitable, to make their entire plans work. Varnathis could probably stand on its own, but it would be much diminished without that money, without that flow of trade. Tusktown would probably return to being a tiny settlement, right? A beachhead for explorers and hunters, and not much more than that, instead of the vibrant kind of Arctic port that it is. So there is this kind of, I'm setting up kind of a larger Machiavellian system where you could start creating kind of, your corkboard with your various houses and players and drawing strings between them to show how this web of power is interconnected, and have that tied from, various locations and various NPCs in those locations, because I do think that at the end of the day, this story is the kind of story of what's actually happening up here. We've got other wild cards as well, right? I think the Blue Claw Mountain mines actually have a lot more wealth in them, but they're currently mostly closed. Because you've got Rhyme Shield, right? The ancient dwarven mine that's up in the mountains. That mine was not exhausted when they abandoned it. They abandoned it because ice serpents killed everyone. And that mine is filled with riches still, but it will take adventurers to clear the place out, solve the problem with the ice serpents, and allow that mine to be reopened, which will then allow its wealth to flow through. So there may be a way that the players become directly involved with this by working to free up that mine and changing the landscape of trade, focusing it more on ore and gems. It already has a strong focus on gem, but ore, precious ore, and gems that come from that mine would severely disrupt the kind of carefully balanced trade that is currently going on. Because the mountain range to the south is mostly not filled with much in the way of ore. It has some copper deposits and that, but it doesn't have silver, it doesn't have gold. And its iron is pretty thin. So there are a number of ways that the players can get directly involved with this system. The mine opening up the mines is certainly one. They could also get involved with the logging consortiums that are slowly being gobbled up and consumed by larger and larger houses. Especially in part 3 of Wolfren's Fate, when the players are going to help rescue a group of loggers that they met in part 1, right? So in part 1, they meet some loggers in a just kind of a throwaway encounter that happens while they're between days of exploring in the first between the first and second floors. They go and do some shopping, and they meet some loggers who are about to head out to the Gemwood. Those loggers turn back up in part 3 because they've stumbled into some trouble and the PCs can save them, and that becomes a major point of contact for the player characters in one logging company, and it happens to be one of the free logging companies that's left. So again, that's another way that the players can get involved. Now, when they get out to Red Thistle, and Red Thistle is primarily the cattle and meat ranching and dairy ranching parts of the valley, they'll learn that aspect of kind of the food trade, because while Wyrmbone and its surrounding farms produce a great deal of food, it's mostly vegetables, fruits and vegetables. And they do a lot of fishing in the nearby lake. But it is Red Thistle that provides most of the meat. Aside from game, most of the meat comes from Red Thistle. There are caravans daily that travel between Red Thistle and Wyrmbone with cattle for slaughter, or dairy products that come from the farms out there. So the whole thing is kind of a delicate situation, and the players are just kind of walking right into it like players do. And that's kind of what I'm trying to set up, right? Is a situation where when the players do finally kind of realize the depths of everything that's here, wherever they decide to kind of plumb and stake their flag and say, hey, we think this is wrong, we're going to do something about it. There's something there that ties back into this overall overarching economic and political structure. And I've been putting a lot of thought in this lately just because the players are starting to interact with it, right? I did have some of my players had that encounter with Radlin Trevere. As a matter of fact, it happened last night with my group, that they, at the very end of the session, had the archery contest with Radlin, and frankly were a little put off by the fact that they realized that he let them win. And I'm still trying to kind of suss as to whether or not that's a bad play experience or not. I do think there is a little bit of a problem with that, because it's like, oh, we did this thing, but it didn't work and let us win. But I do think it conveys the right message to the players that Radlin is a snake, right? He's manipulative, and he's willing to kind of let he's willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that the players think that Trevere is a good guy and can be trusted and is an ally in their struggles. In fact, he is right now, because he sees them as useful. The moment that changes, however, is not going to go so well, right? I mean, the last thing you want is Radlin Trevere not on your side, because, as I said, he's very wealthy and very powerful, and he can shift the dials on you pretty severely. So making him angry can make it harder for you to get jobs, to buy things, to do all sorts of things in town, if it interacts with one of the things that he controls. So yeah, that's kind of what I got going on. I guess I got a little bit of time for questions or thoughts. That's kind of the end of the discussion anyway. Those are all the notes that I had. I kind of all of them. So there's a question in here from chat. Is the free city-state, is it a free city-state or part of an empire nation? This is in reference to Varnathus. Varnathus is a free state. So technically all of the cities in the north here are their own city-states. Wyrmbone answers to no one but Wyrmbone. Varnathus answers to no one but Varnathus. Same with Tustown. There are other smaller communities as well that view themselves as independent. Red Thistle considers itself part of Wyrmbone, and its power and protection. But the free farms certainly don't, right? There are the free farms further to the west in the shadow of the Hook Mountain. They definitely do not consider themselves part of Wyrmbone. But that said, even though all of these places consider themselves independent, they work together so closely that they may almost be seen as kind of a larger nation. But in reality, it's a nation of it's a kind of wilderness of free states, because there are kind of vast areas of wilderness that frankly aren't controlled by anybody in them. There's plenty of places where it's just like, yeah, the guards, the blue banners from Wyrmbone do not make it out this far, as a result, there is no law, there is no authority out here. This is wilderness, and that's just what it is. And honestly, For Zankar's purposes, I mean, could they come in and take those places? They probably could, but there's nothing there, so taking empty land, they're not going to send guards out in the middle of a winter with no place to stay in empty places. Thieves Guild, what are the monthly dues? I don't know that Wyrmbone actually has a Thieves Guild. I haven't decided on that yet. Right now the thing I'm playing with is that there is an underworld, and I'm trying to play with that as something a little bit more diffuse than a centralized Thieves Guild, right? Because the moment you have a Thieves Guild, all of a sudden there's a Thieves Guild leader or guild master, and there's, all these various, and you've got, it's an entire criminal organization. And I almost kind of like the idea that it's more diffuse than that. That there are criminals, that there are some groups of criminals, but there isn't any one Thieves Guild for the guard to come find and bonk the head of. There's no central location where you can go and just take them out. There is, however, some locations. There's the Belching Blackguard, which is a bar, a hidden bar, which is where these job cards are coming from. And that is a central location of criminal activity, but it's not a guild. It's a bar. It's a place of criminal business. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to play with right now. I don't know if it doesn't quite play out the way I want. I can always fall back to the kind of, yes, there is a Thieves Guild structure, but I'm frankly trying to kind of avoid it. I'm trying to do something a little different, because I think that's just the easy button when it comes to criminal organization. Whereas I want to build something with a bit more nuance. I got a question here. How's my penumbras doing in the playtest? They're doing okay. I think I need to go in and do a tuning pass on the penumbras. It hasn't gotten a playtest like, our bigger playtest. It's still kind of my first draft. So honestly, I think I need to give it a tuning pass at some point in time. I think there's some things in there that don't quite work the way I want them to, and seeing it in play now, I can see that. But I also think that the moat ability and whatnot is perhaps a bit confusing for some of my players. I have two penumbras, one in each group, and one of them kind of just doesn't get it, and the other one does, but doesn't use it very often. So I think I got to work on it. I don't think it's quite there yet, but we'll see. More playtesting will tell me more. Another question here. How far does Wyrmbone's control extend? So Wyrmbone, generally speaking, is thought to control... I have a map here. I might have the map here. Let's see what this is. Yes, here it is. So Wyrmbone has patrols that run from the River Bridge Inn all the way to Red Thistle. Right? So the River Bridge Inn is not under their control, but that's the limit to which they patrol. Varnathis has a guard that patrols up to the other side of the River Bridge Inn. So the River Bridge Inn tends to be the meeting spot between the guards from Wyrmbone and the guards from Varnathis. Now, that road, which kind of goes from the River Bridge Inn through the lowlands there, runs along the Icefog Lake, comes up through Wyrmbone, follows the river there, and heads out to Red Thistle. That path is just one section of the Ruby Road. From there, that path then heads out, skirts the Ashen Barrows, and heads off into the mountains. So that is the path of the Ruby Road. And so it then kind of crosses through those mountains to get to Tustown and go. Okay. I think I'm back. Sorry about that. That's odd. OBS has now disconnected on me twice. My apologies. So as I was saying, the road, that goes from Varnathis, crosses through the River Bridge Inn, hits Wyrmbone, goes through Red Thistle, and then heads on to Tustown. So their control is mostly the Gemwood, the Icefog Lake, although it does not extend to the Mud Fens to the south. It kind of is roughly a circle from Wyrmbone encapsulating most of the Gemwood, and that's kind of their area of control, all things considered. So there is that. All right, well, I think that's about all I have here for today. I got another stream starting here in just a bit, so I think I'm going to call this one good. Great questions here today. I want to thank you all for coming by. Thank you all for being supporters of this. Frankly, folks, I'm a little frustrated with some of the pacing on some of the stuff here. In that I want it to be going faster. I'll tell you a couple things. First of all, I'm still waiting, honestly, on getting my manuscript back from the editors for part 1. I'm getting to the point where I'm gonna have to start thinking of other solutions because it's just not moving. Part 2 is well underway and is almost done being written. I've probably got another couple solid days of writing on that. Not that I'll be able to do them concurrently. I actually have a ton of playtesting this week. I have another playtest group on Thursday and then another one on Monday, because this Monday's was a makeup. So I have 2 more games in the next week. By the time we meet again next week, I'll be talking about more playtest feedback because we will have had 2 more sessions. And we'll be getting close to the end of kind of the first part, because I think both groups are starting to narrow in on finding out about Wolfren's ring. They're not quite there yet, but they're getting there. So, yeah, I've been a little frustrated with some of my progress lately. But I will say this. I've got a little something else that I've been working on here. What? Huh. Well, folks, I'm really frustrated by that. I don't know what is going on with OBS and why it keeps disconnecting, but I'm going to have to look into that. Hopefully this is just a temporary thing. But folks, I'm gonna call this good, and I'm gonna do a diagnostic here real quick before my next stream. That is very odd. 2 disconnects in one stream is very weird. I had this happen once on Saturday as well, so I'm gonna have to investigate this. But that's what we got, folks. Our next stream will be next Tuesday. We'll probably be talking more playtest feedback. Hopefully I'll have some exciting news about some other stuff, but we'll have to see how that goes. Thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you for your support. It really does mean the world to me. I'm about to order more art for part 2, and frankly, all of your Patreon support goes directly into that. So you're working to make this a more beautiful adventure, and I appreciate it. Thank you for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.